If you want to publish faster, stand out in academia, and stop feeling behind, this video is for you. Because here's the thing. Working harder isn't always the answer. The one thing that really pains me is seeing academics and researchers doing things that really don't matter day in, day out. Here are the 3 workflows that you need to minimize distractions, maximize your output, and make sure you stand out and finish faster if you're doing your PhD. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at this. These are my 3 workflows. 1, 2, 3. And ultimately, if you stick to these workflows, you're not going to go too wrong in your academic career. Now, the first one, let's zoom in on that and have a little bit of a look, shall we? The first one is spark. We need to spark ideas continuously. And the thing is that quite often we feel lost. We feel like we don't know what's going on in our field. So we need to do this every so often. And the first thing we need to do is search. We need to be searching continuously for research ideas around our main topic. What's going on over here? What's going on over here? We don't know, so we need to find it. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can use AI tools or not. You can go to Google Scholar, you can go to OpenAlex, or you can go to Elicit. Here it is. So you can use this to get a summary of top papers, and you need to run it regularly just to make sure that you've got sort of like the leading edge of research in your mind. After we've sort of like found all of these references, we need to make sure we save them to our reference manager. That means you've got to put it into anything like Zotero or Mendeley or whatever you're using, EndNote for example. So here we go, we put it into our reference manager. Now, there's the searching bit done, but now we need to synthesize. We need to find the patterns. So if we go down here, we need to find the patterns in the research that we've just discovered. So you can do that by reading each abstract and sort of like understanding each paper, or we can get sort of like a bit of a shortcut now and head over to something like Notebook LM. So if we head over to Notebook LM, you can see you can put in a load of sources here. You just add source, upload and drop, and then you can start chatting with that reference list. So any question you've got down here, what are the main findings here? And so you go in and it will give you a response based on all of the reference lists that you've put in. I love doing it and sort of like chunking up my research into like different topics, putting them in here, and then just sort of like exploring the literature. It's never been easier, but we don't stop there, obviously, because it is something that we need to do regularly. And also this will only give us a high level kind of understanding of all of that work. Then we need to sort of like delve a little bit deeper. Oh, I like that. Delve, splash into each individual paper and understand what's really going on. And this is where you need to synthesize the literature. You need to actually understand what's going on. You need to find out what are the interesting things, and importantly, read everything you can get your hands on if it makes sense, and it's sort of like helping you spark those ideas. The thing about this workflow is you need to do it every so often when you sort of like feel uninspired. If you're just lacking creativity, you don't know where to take your research, do this workflow. Also, I like to do this workflow regularly because then when my sort of like supervisor comes up to me, I'm going into supervisor meetings, the one thing they love to hear is, oh, I read a paper recently, it says this, this, and this, and then they sort of like spark their own ideas. Remember that quite often supervisors don't have a workflow like this. They sort of like rely on other people telling them about things. So if you can be that valuable source of information, you'll really stand out to your supervisor. Trust me, if you start a conversation with, oh, I was reading an interesting paper recently, and they'll be like, oh, what? And you can just tell them, brilliant, you've done all the work, run this workflow regularly. If you're feeling less creative, kind of stuck in a rut, it really helps. But the next one is just as important. Check this one out. The next workflow you need to know about is map and frame. This is where you have data. Okay, you've got to have data. To run this workflow, you've got to have all this stuff kind of floating around that you then turn into stories. So the first thing you need to do, obviously, is with data is you create figures. Now, you should be doing this as you go along throughout your research career. You should get some data, turn it into a figure or schematic, and then analyze that and just run that over and over again until you kind of like just feel like you've got a better understanding, a story that you could tell someone else. For example, you should be able to hold up a figure and you should be able to say, look, this figure tells me this, this, and this, and that's interesting because of this, this, and this. Now you're already on your way to writing a thesis or a peer-reviewed paper. Super easy, and you need to do it. A lot of people get too lazy with the data. They'd be like,
oh, I'll analyze that later.
No. When you collect data, you need to be analyzing it almost the same day if you can, if not the next day. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of build up all of this data and then you're just not going to do anything with it. Trust me, I've been there, and my own laziness surprises me, and I'm sure your laziness surprises you sometimes too. So you need to be analyzing. So with figures, and then you kind of like, come up with the conclusions. There we are. That's better, isn't it? Okay, so we got figures and then we got conclusions, and then we need to start thinking about what's the story we can tell with multiple figures. So we have loads of all of these figures, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4, and then we need to say, okay, we've got the individual conclusions. How do we combine that all together into like one story? Now, a story has multiple things, but ultimately you need to say what problem you're solving, the evidence that you've provided, and then you need to be able to talk about the outcome. What is the important thing for other people? And if you can do that for each individual kind of like conclusion, story, figures you've mashed together, you're well on your way to sort of like publishing that data. So you have your problem, what are you trying to solve? Here's all the evidence. Look, this figure says this figure says this figure says this. And then together they combine to say something very important, and that's your research story. And then you say the outcome of this means that these people are going to be happier, these people are going to suffer from diseases less, this solar cell is going to be more efficient. Anything you can say, the big overall thing, and you kind of keep that big overall thing to one or two big things, because in here we got one conclusion, one conclusion, one conclusion, one conclusion, and then they all build up into one or two big kind of like reveals, and you want to keep it very simple. If you do that over and over, that workflow will help you build out all of the data you need, and you'll be surprised when you come to write a paper or write a chapter of your thesis that you'll have the stories already there. Don't be lazy, do this regularly. And then the last thing is just to make sure that you have told people. Like, this is the thing, told people. Make sure you've told people. Make sure that you're talking about this regularly. Put your hand up for interdepartmental sort of like symposia. Ask to speak to your research group, because the act of talking out aloud your research means you'll know where kind of like the little holes are. The one thing I always used to find is like when I'm doing my sort of like PowerPoint presentation, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense there. That makes sense there. And when you actually explain it to people, you're like, oh, actually, no, that part needs to go above the other one. That bit needs to go above the other one. And it just sort of like helps you solidify that research story. If you can tell a little research story, it doesn't have to be a big, amazing one, every so often out loud to people, it will really help you understand your very own research, because when you have to think on your feet and sort of tell people the research story, it's amazing what you realize your data is actually telling you. And obviously the people in the crowd will also help you, but sometimes their suggestions are a little bit rubbish, and you just have to smile and nod and be like, okay, that is something for me to forget. Remember to stay around to the end, because the last workflow I'm going to talk about is the thing that makes or breaks your career. Okay, the last research workflow that you need to understand and need to perfect is the draft and write. That is where you're taking your research stories and you're just sort of like telling them in the way that academics want to be told, which is apparently very boring, dense prose written down in a peer-reviewed paper or thesis. Apparently we love that. Things are changing, but that's how we do it. The first thing I like to do when I'm writing is create bullet points. Now, that means that for my research story, I've only really got kind of like 3 bullet points, and that is the problem, the evidence, and the outcome. And then I flesh it out from there. Whether or not you're writing a chapter of your thesis or a peer-reviewed paper, I like to start with figures and then bullet points. So under each figure, I like to put bullet points of what that thing is telling me. Super easy. And then you can put it into AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And you can say, here are my bullet points about this figure. Expand it out and actually sort of like write a paragraph to support the figure that I'm presenting. Absolutely love that. And the next thing we need to do, obviously, after we got bullet points, like I said, is create full paragraphs. So this is where we create paragraphs, and that's what we love. And then we need to obviously check it for structure, check it for those things. So the last thing I like to do is, after I've created stuff, then I'm doing the review stage. And the review stage means that I'm looking for, firstly, structure. And after structure, I'm looking for clarity. And finally, I'm looking to polish anything with someone else. So that means I'm getting someone else to look over it and just sort of like giving me those final touches. When you give someone a piece of work, tell them what you want from them. You need to say to them, right, this is only a first draft. Can you give me some like massive edits? Can you give me some sort of like opinions about the evidence I'm presenting? Or in this final stage, this polish stage, you'd be like, look, don't worry about the structure, that's been done. Don't worry about the clarity, that's been done. We need just to make sure that there's no obvious glaring mistakes that an editor would just sort of like dismiss out of hand right away. So that is what you need to do, and that's what I do. I review it, I look for structure. I'm like, does this make sense? Does this story actually tell the story I want it to make sense? Am I putting anything too early on in my story? And then clarity, am I saying the right words? And polish, does it sort of like give people the right impression about my work and about the quality of work that I want to present? That's really what it's about. And those three things come together to give you your thesis or your peer-reviewed paper, PRP. Absolutely love that. And so the thing about all of these are that it doesn't matter what stage of research you're in, you are doing these over and over again. So if you need sort of like ideas, go to the Spark workflow. If you've got data, you need to start sort of like pushing it through this map and frame sort of workflow. And then if you've got a good research story, you've told people, and then you're like, you know what, this is ready for the big time, this is ready to push out to the world, then we need to take that and we need to say, okay, I need to draft and write. And that is where it sort of like really comes into its own. This is where you really push your career and also, you know, your PhD or research forward. If you're not going through 1, 2, 3, if you're not doing this over and over again, then you're just not going to finish. So if you ever get stuck, if you ever feel like, you know what, I'm just not making the progress that I need to make, go back to one of these. If you're lacking ideas, go to the first one. If you got the data, but you just haven't made it into a research story, go through the map and frame flow. If you sort of like have got all of the data, you've got the research story, but your research is suffering because you're not publishing enough, then you need to be drafting and writing over and over and over again. And those are the 3 workflows that you need to succeed in academia. And I don't think really you need anything else. Let me know. If you like this video, go check out this one where I talk about a simple PhD strategy that geniuses use. Amazing, go check it out.